Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with another country guide as the Mamluks. So the Mamluks start off in a very unique position. They are the second largest nation in the game, and they are also one of the nations most likely to die, which is kind of hilarious if one thinks about it. So the Mamelukes start off in the Middle East, here located in what is modern day Egypt and the Levant, the Palestine, Jerusalem, Syria region. A little bit into Arabia here as well. And they are a very interesting country to play, considering in the newest expansion they are given a unique form of government, the Mameluke form of government, which people will note has no heir. And this is because as the Mameluke Sultanate, you never have heirs. You only elect a new ruler when your ruler dies. That's due to their government form, which the key part to realize of the government form is that it allows for max promoted cultures +3, which is very key once you get to the age of absolutism. You'll be able to get a multicultural nation effortlessly. They also give your ruler +2 administrative skill, which is really strong, which means your rulers are always going to have a 2 in admin skill. It's equivalent to the Prussians +2 military skill or the Mings +1 admin skill. It means 99% of the time in the game you'll have an excess of admin power, which is quite handy because admin power is probably the most precious resource in the game outside of money, that you need to have a functioning large empire. And also to promote cultural costs, which is of course the new feature that allows you to build advisors above level 3, is cheaper, and the cost of advisors with your ruler's culture is cheaper too. That sounds really good. However, it's important to realize that when a Mameluke ruler dies, the succession will give you 3 heirs, and 2 of which usually are of governments you have, cultures that you have within your government, like Egyptian or Syrian. The other one is usually Circassian up here, because that's historically where a lot of their slaves come from. And it's important to note the Mameluke rulers are all former slaves, and they don't have wives or children, which is why it's not hereditary. Most of them are imported, but if you pick a Mameluke ruler of your culture, like one of your major cultures, like Egyptian, they get a severe reduction to the legitimacy of their rule. Important to note. On the other hand, if you pick one of a foreign culture, they don't have much of a power base in the empire, but they start out with a really high level of legitimacy and usually better skills. I don't know how accurate that is. In my Let's Play that I did as them, where I killed the Ottomans, I found that the foreign heirs, or your foreign new rulers, tended to be better in terms of stats. And the rulers all tend to be of a moderate age, so they tend to die relatively faster than your average ruler. Not as old as, say, the popes, who die really fast. Let's see, what else is important? You have reduced autonomy, or increased monthly autonomy reduction, which is really nice. Allows you to administer a larger empire. But the big things as the Mameluke government come as your interactions. Now, you see how it's promote Circassian, sell off Circassian, and recruit from Circassian? This is due to the culture of your ruler. So if you change to Egyptian, all of this would change. So for example, this one, recruit from Circassian lands, you would get bonus manpower. First of all, it says military culture progress. That's not military points. That builds up based off your ruler's stats, and then you use it. So if they have a 2 stat, it's about 50 months or so. You'd get manpower from the amount of that culture existing in your country. But seeing as Circassian's a foreign culture, you don't get any. But if you had Egyptians, you'd get a manpower boost from your Egyptian provinces. So at the cost of lower legitimacy, starting out as your ruler, you could get larger bonuses the longer your monarch rules for, if that makes sense. Same thing with sell off Circassian slaves. You have to have that culture in order to get money from it. But what is what you can always use is promote Circassian in government. For having 100 admin cultural progress for 1 year, all power expenditures will be 5% cheaper. Now this is unusual because it's a 1-year modifier, not a 10 years modifier. But it means if you fire it, everything from new tech will be 5% cheaper, to 5% development, to 5% cheaper raising new generals, to 5% cheaper ideas, etc., etc., etc. So what I recommend you do, it's about a 10-year, it's about a 50-month waiting period, which is about 4, almost 5 years. Well, a little over 4 years. I recommend you use it when you are going to go through a massive expenditure of power. Don't just use it for tiny little things. Actually plan out when you're going to use it. For example, if you are trying to develop an institution, say the Renaissance. Renaissance might not be the best example, but we'll go with the Renaissance. It's an institution that will not start in your lands, and you won't get really any benefit from it until it either spreads to the Tunisian region or the Ottoman area. Or somehow Venice spreads it to here and then it jumps to you. So it will take you a while to get it. And you actually start off with some really nice land, considering you have farmlands up here. We have some marsh too, but you have a couple farmlands in a row. You actually have one of the higher percentages of farmland near your capital that anybody does outside of like France. Which means for the Mamluks, developing an institution here is relatively cheap because you do get a development cost reduction. And also, I'll just quick mention, this is also Grand Area of the Mediterranean. These provinces here all have a bonus to goods production, which means your trade node here is always going to be fairly valuable, the Alexandria trade node, which you'll mostly control, but not completely. So in terms of putting an institution there, you can do it fairly easily. You can also, of course, don't forget you have edicts, if you have this ability to do edicts. Courage development is a 10% reduction. If you have happy merchants, you can get another 7.5 or 5% or 10% development, which is also very handy. And then if you use your power here, it's even cheaper, which means if you store up like 4 or 5 or 600 of each power and then use it all at once, you end up saving a lot more monarch power than if you just use your 5% for a tiny little thing. But it does mean if you use properly, you can usually end up, actually not usually, you will end up with more saved monarch points than anybody except for like Milan, Florence, or France, who all have tech 5% off. But used properly, you can even keep up with them, which means essentially the Mamluks monarch is going to give you an excess of admin power and overall just a bonus, a lot of free power overall, not just admin, but military and diplomatic. In some ways, I feel, and this is just my personal opinion, the Mamluk government form is currently the best form of government existing in the game, with the possible exception of the Russian Tsar. Just because of how it gives you 2 free monarch power, you don't have to worry about heirs, you don't have to worry about odd succession, inheritance. You get the ability to get manpower, money, and free points. You're a fairly stable form of government. You get a lot of tolerated cultures. It's just a really nice form of government I have found overall. Probably my favorite I've played with. Just honestly my opinion. The only one that come close is the Prussian government, but that has its problems as well. Now, considering I've just literally spent like 10 minutes talking about the government form, it's time to move on to their ideas. The Mamluks have rather sorry ideas in terms of military. They have a lot of good trade ideas, but not military. They get 10% cavalry combat ability, which is nice. It'll help a little bit, but considering how unuseful cavalry is mid-game, they're good early on, but fall off later on. Not too handy. You also get plus 25% trade steering, which doesn't sound like much until you realize that the Mamluks, from their position down here, can force all trade from going around well, except if it comes this way, can steer a lot of trade that would go around Africa to like Spain, Portugal, England. They can steer it through their lands first, which means you can usually direct a good portion of the world's trade to Alexandria. You can even steal stuff from Aleppo. Pretty much everything Samarkand south you can eventually steer to your land, assuming you trade ideas later on. But even if you don't, you'll tend to have a lot more trade power than one would imagine you would from you just starting lands. You also get 5% trade power. You also get more trade range. They might be telling you trade is key to the Mamluks. It's important to remember this. A lot of the Mamluks' money comes from trade in the end. They can have pretty good land, but a lot of money comes from trade. The next one is yearly prestige, which has nice bonuses overall. You get morale, trade power, cheaper techs, legitimacy, everything. It's nice, not overwhelming. Purchase new Mamluks is really good. You get manpower recovery speed plus 15%, which is actually one of the higher manpower recovery speeds in the game. I'm pretty sure it's mainly just behind both the Ottomans and the Russian ideas, which are, I think, 20%. Could be wrong, there could be other nations, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the better ones. The next one is you've got Reform of the Army plus 5% discipline. This is probably your best military idea, which sounds kind of stupid. 5 discipline, really handy. Problem is, if you think about it, and also if you know, the Ottomans start out with automatic 5% discipline, which means until you hit this idea, your army is always going to be weaker than the Ottomans. Unless, of course, you take advisors and other stuff. But odds are it's going to be weaker on average than the Ottomans, which is important because the only rival the Mamluks really have is the Ottomans. Pretty much. Korakwanalu a little bit. Ethiopia, not so much. The next idea, plus 10% production efficiency. Again, getting you more money from the provinces you have. Cheaper stability. It's nice. It's not immensely needed, considering you have a pretty stable government as it is. You get 10% trade efficiency, which of course, going with the Mamluks' trade focus, gets you more money. And their ambition idea is provincial trade power modifier plus 25%. Again, giving you more bonus to trade, specifically trying to help you control the trade in your land. So essentially that's to give you a bonus so that less trade will pass through the Alexandria trade node and more will stick in the Alexandria trade node. Which means for the Mamluks, putting marketplaces in a lot of their provinces is more valuable than the average countries. In terms of starting location, the Mamluks start off with 2 vassals. They have the Hijaz and they have Fadl. Pardon me if I'm butchering these names. This is a pretty useless nation in the scheme of things. Provides 3 troops to you, is a tribal federation. Not that useful. You're going to want to annex them at some point. The Hijaz, on the other hand, are not a bad vassal to start off with. They control the Muslim holy city of Mecca. They don't control Medina, but it's important to note you are guaranteeing the Medina government, the Medina country at the beginning, and also that you can pretty quickly, I'll just do this quickly, you can pretty much immediately vassalize them if you want to, if you spend time developing your relation. It's pretty easy in general for the Mamluks to vassalize almost everybody in this region except for obviously the Shia and Ibadi. So if you're afraid of the Naj going too big, you just vassalize them. Then you can always feed them provinces in the area. It's quite handy to start out with. Essentially, it means the early game Mamluk goal will be to dominate the Arabian Peninsula, specifically this central region. Oman will take longer. Yemen, of course, has Shia and tends to cause a bit of a mess themselves. But in the long run, your big threat that is coming is the Ottomans. So luckily you have a couple little buffer states in between you and them, which will give you time to build up your military essentially and try and have an army that when the Mamluks attack, they don't just, when the Ottomans attack you as the Mamluks, they don't just completely overrun you. There are a couple ways to do this. Usually I found the Ottomans and the Akor Kunlu tend to get along pretty well. If you're lucky, the Eu4 conquer Dul Qadir and Adana and create a buffer between you and the Ottomans. The other thing I've happened is I've seen Dul Qadir, on the other hand, conquer this area and form a buffer state with the Ottomans. That is the best outcome, is having a country that blocks off the Ottomans, is allied with the Ottomans, and is not hostile to you. Anything that prevents the Ottomans from expanding eastward or south is to your benefit. If you're going to fight the Ottomans, you're kind of better off fighting them earlier rather than later. Later on, you have some negative events, they have some positive events, and they can swallow up a lot of land faster than you can. I wouldn't recommend allying yourself to someone like Karaman or Kandar or really any of these, because if they attack them, the Ottomans... Okay, at the beginning of the games, the Ottomans have a stronger army than you do. Once their genius general and king die off, they're a little bit stronger than you, 5% discipline stronger. As the game goes on, though, their ideas are much more militaristically inclined than you, and they will become stronger that way, if that makes sense. So you've got a window of opportunity after like 5 to 10 years to about 50 years where they're relatively weak. Relatively, of course, is a term, because if you're playing historical nations, they're really strong regardless. But they tend to at least initially expand this way rather than come after you, which is nice. But they will come after you because they have the event Conquer the Levant and then Conquer Egypt, which gives them claims on most of the country, most of your provinces in this region, which is a serious problem. Now, the Korakunlu over here are less stable than less unstable than they used to be, as in more stable, but they tend to still fall apart to rebels and stuff, and that's mainly due to the fact that they're Shia and half their land is Sunni and it's not of their culture, and everybody around them kind of hates them to some degree, if that makes sense. But the Korakunlu will tend to conquer some of this region and get more powerful. They might be one of your earlier wars of major conquest you want to try and do. If you annex Fadal here, or the Korakunlu and the Ottoman alliance breaks down, you can easily attack and surge your way into taking like Baghdad and this stuff, which, if you look at it, it's pretty poorly developed, but it's some pretty nice land through here. Lots of farmlands. Also, if you're going to form Arabia, which I recommend you actually try and do as the Mamluks, because it doesn't get rid of your government form. That's important. I'll repeat it again. Forming Arabia as the Mamluks keeps your government form. You do not lose it, which means you can have Arabia and the Mamluk government form, which is really powerful, considering how much claims you get as Arabia. But in order to do that, you have to control Baghdad and this area up here, which is a little bit difficult. You might not be able to do it until after you beat the Ottomans in a war or so. But you do have to beat up the Korakunlu and conquer this whole area. So I recommend trying to vassalize or conquer some of these nations here. They can't put up a fight to you. You've got the second largest army in the world. It's easy at the beginning. And then move on to fighting the Korakunlu and Mushasha, who tend to grow strong. I wouldn't recommend really going into Persia because there's a lot of Shia land there. Plus, there's usually some very large allied nations in this region that are nowadays fairly stable and slowly expanding this way. I wouldn't expand south too quickly because Ethiopia down here is pretty much in a golden age with their genius ruler and very good starting position. They'll probably dominate this area. If not, Adal or Ajaran will. But I don't recommend going into their lands till mid-game when you have like religious ideas and can actually convert the Coptic faith. Otherwise, you'll just be suffering rebellion after rebellion after rebellion after rebellion. Because obviously you're a Sunni Muslim. In terms of missions, you don't really have any great missions other than conquer areas, ally stuff. You don't have any unique missions like the Ottomans do, per se. In terms of ideas, now this is where it gets a bit tricky. I would recommend for the starting Mamluk idea, you take defensive ideas. Because of the morale. In my opinion, the morale is the strongest idea in the game early on. The other option is you take quality ideas to get the infantry and cavalry combat ability to be able to fight the Ottomans. I don't recommend you take quantity ideas because they have a better military than you and you need to at least equal it. Plus, in terms of manpower, you should roughly be able to keep up during a war. If not, you're not really playing the Mamluks right and you're in trouble anyway. The other thing to note is if you keep your vassals around for the war with the Ottomans, they'll prove to be a wonderful distraction and carpet sieger that you can use to have more troops than you would if you owned all their lands yourself. For your second idea group, it's kind of relatively up to you what you want to do. I wouldn't recommend any of the diplomatic ideas at all, unless you're going to do like some weird colonization Mamluk game, which I don't recommend. You can't obviously take a military if you start off with defensive ideas. So you're down to admin ideas, and you've got a bit of a choice. You can either do administrative, which stacks on top of your rulers plus 2 admin power. You get the cheaper admin tech cost, which helps a lot. Or you can take religious ideas for the conversion strength and overall just stability. Innovative ideas, not too useful. Economic ideas is good. Expansion is totally useless for you unless you're colonizing. Humanist could be done, but I don't really recommend it because you will never be able to keep up with someone like the Ottomans in terms of tolerance. You'll never be able to tolerate heathens enough that they don't cause some problem in your realm. It's honestly easier to some degree just to convert them all and sort it out later. Specifically, it will help you with converting the Shia provinces that you'll inevitably run across. Specifically, some of these right here have religious centers, so they're going to be -5 missionary strength, and without religious ideas, there's almost no way you'll be able to convert those to Sunni. But once you do, this area should be fairly stable. By the time you fight the Ottomans, I recommend you pretty much control this whole region. Actually, the sad part is once you conquer this whole region, you'll still probably be behind the Ottomans in development once they swallow up the Byzantines and the other Anatolian miners. But at that point, I recommend attacking. For your next military, for the next idea, I recommend another military, probably either quality or offensive, just to keep up with the Ottomans. Most of your wars in land is going to be against the Ottomans. Your serious wars and battles will be against the Ottomans. Everyone else, you can pretty much overrun with just one military idea group. They're not that strong. Ethiopia might give you a little run for your money, or any Persian nations you attack, but the rest of the Middle East is pretty much your sandbox to play with. You just invade, you win, it's nice and easy. In terms of allies, Tunis actually proves to be a pretty good ally for the Mamluks. Unless they get destroyed by Castile, Aragon, Portugal, they tend to be the country that ends up controlling this region. If you're allied to them, obviously you don't have to worry about anyone attacking you from the west. Plus, they usually are willing to come to your aid in a defensive war versus the Ottomans, or in just any of your other conquest wars in this region. So they're a pretty reliable ally. Other than them, I don't think you've got really any other allies. You could probably have a minor nation or two, but in terms of major large nations that are useful, unless someone conquers this region that's not the Korokorlu or the Ottomans, or conquers this region and it's not Ethiopia, pretty much everybody else is better being either your vassal or their lands owned by you, if that makes sense. If you get a chance to, some areas of the world you want to try and get a hold of, if you get a hold of this coffee area down here in Mocha, you'll get coffee Arabica, which will get you more trade power for a little while. There's also the 2 gold mines here south of Ethiopia, which are worth picking up just to finance your armies. If you're really ambitious, you can go all the way down to here to the Mutapa, Sofala region and get their gold mines, which at that point you should be rolling in money anyway. You could, of course, expand to India if you want to, but that's always a mess. Really just dominating this area right here will make you the most powerful nation in the game with the most income, and overall just a really safe empire. Going beyond that requires some luck and extreme conquest, because once you expand out of this region, you start to run into, you know, Russia, Austria, Hungary, Poland over here, India and China over here. There's nobody down here, but there's nothing worth conquering. That's about it. If you expand this way, you're obviously going to run into Castile, Aragon, Spain, or Tunis's area, which can prove to be a little sticky. It's also not worth conquering because they have the increased core cost because they're Berber in this region. So it's not worth conquering this anyway. It's much better off usually having them as an ally. That's about it. If you do want to really stack the Mamluks' ability to have, you know, admin power like you wouldn't believe, taking administrative will do that because of the decreased core cost and the admin tech cost. It's really strong. Just from this idea alone, you should never be behind in admin tech unless you're missing institutions. You should be able to core everything, and then you usually should have points left over to develop your provinces, which is good because a lot of your provinces are terrible. Honestly, the Mamluks might have the second highest development in the game, but most of their territory is like coastal desert or mountains. Other than Egypt itself, it's really bad land. So that pretty much is it for the Mamluks. In terms of your religion, you're of course Muslim, so you have a choice between mysticism or legalism. If you're converting, mysticism is better for wars and conversion and defense, and legalism's better if you're trying to tech up or just make money. That pretty much sums it up. The rest of this is not too big of a deal. It's important to note, start off with the Shalafi form school of Islam, which gives you additional merchant, which is nice. And you also can try and pick up some of the other schools. If you pick up schools, the Malaki school is particularly good. You should be able to get that just by being allied to Tunis. Again, another development cost reduction, making it easier to develop your lands. The aggressive expansion school is pretty useful in terms of conquering without coalitions. And if you want to just get it completely absurd, you pick up these guys and get even cheaper admin tech cost. These ones, if you can pick it up, are good, but the odds of you actually getting Shia friendly with you are rather low. That's about it for the Mamluks. Definitely watch out for the Ottomans. They're your major rival. Korkwanlu are a lot weaker than they appear. This area is your playbox. Don't mess with Ethiopia too early till you have a tech lead. Tunis is probably one of your better allies. And other than that, you're pretty safe. Other than the Ottomans, there's going to be Ottomans and maybe Ethiopia. There's never going to be really any conquerors that invade this area in AI games. In human player games, all bets are off. This isn't a guide for multiplayer, particularly other than roughly how to play the Mamluks. So, thank you guys all for watching. If you like this guide, please like it, comment, or check out all my other guides. I've done quite a few country guides. And please subscribe. And I will see you all another time. Bye for now.